What has been the best corporate Darwin Award? A decision made by a company that basically killed the business. I own a vineyard and was looking for numbered tags to attach to the post at the end of each row. One website that sold such items said, "Don't use cheap cattle ear tags to mark your rows," and proceeded to describe how much better their tags were. I thought, cheap cattle ear tags, of course, and promptly found and purchased them at a fraction of the cost. I would never have thought of it if not for this great marketing. I officially nominate Schlitz beer for the Corporate Darwin Hall of Fame. Number 1 beer in America by far in the late 60s, early 70s, when some genius at the head office decided to change the recipe to save money on ingredients. Sales fell off a cliff. Almost immediately, they changed back to the old recipe. Boo, it was already too late. The old Schlitz drinkers stayed away in droves. The company remains up Schlitz Creek without a paddle. Prodigy online service. They had a great message board system, which was included in the monthly rate. They got greedy, and for no reason other than wanting to make more money, started charging people to use the board. A message beyond idiotic. And at the time, so many of us users were like, okay, we're done with Prodigy then. Within 1 year, they lost almost complete market share to CompuServe and AOL, and were all but non-existent shortly thereafter, all because they got extra greedy. They also took way too long to realize that people prefer to have meaningful usernames, rather than ones like ZTWX42. Yes, that was my family's actual username. Yes, back then entire families did share one username. Whoever was in charge of getting the yellow pages online. Multi-billion-dollar industry that adapted way too late. Atari flipping its crap in the 80s and backing out of their deal to distribute the Famicom as a video game system in the US. Nintendo decided to do it themselves. Oldsmobile with the "It's not your father's Oldsmobile" ad slogan. The kids didn't want it and the old folks thought it changed. They never recovered from the loss. It was the late 1990s, the middle of the tech boom, in San Diego, one of the hearts of the tech boom. A small consulting company had about 100 programmers contracted out to about a dozen companies. The profits were huge. The company charged $200 HR per person, paid the employee about $70 HR, pocketed the rest. The only overhead was the small main office, a recruiter, an hour person, and an accountant to handle all of that money and small expenses. Then the company scored big. Microsoft HQ in Seattle wanted some of these people, contracting about a dozen of them to start. The profits were so huge the programmers were flown back to San Diego each weekend. The deal was still per hour, and Microsoft loved the people and asked them to work through weekends, saving the company the cost of airfare and bringing in a couple of extra $1 million. So 2 months later, expense reports are getting kicked back. The company was refusing to pay large parking fees for the people who worked 7 days a week for 3 and 4 weeks. The company accountant said they should have taken a cab to the airport since they were gone for 3 weeks. After reminding the accountant that they had not intended to stay that long, that they did so at company request, they were still refused reimbursement on parking. 5 of those contractors resigned due to the parking payment issue, and others slowly followed. The Microsoft deal collapsed because they kept losing people, and within the year the whole company folded. Yes, this company folded during the tech boom, in a boom city. Hundreds of millions of dollars lost because they wanted to screw over their most income producing employees over maybe $2,000 in parking fees. Hilariously short-sighted management decisions bringing down a company. It happens surprisingly often. I'm very much into finance, so I got an interesting one. In 2008, speculators were driving the price of oil to unsustainable levels. Even back when the economy was healthy, those prices made no economic sense at all. Enter Semgroup, a pipeline company that moved oil and traded energy futures on the side. In 2008, they decided to go short on oil. That is to say, they bet that oil prices would go down. For the month or two that followed, oil kept pushing higher and higher, and they kept averaging up their position. The problem here was, Semgroup's management was so certain that prices would fall, they shorted oil on margin, meaning, they started borrowing money from their broker to short oil more. Eventually, the clearinghouse of the brokerage with whom Semgroup assumed this large short position decided that this is too much. Semgroup is losing too much money and they might go bankrupt. And because Semgroup owed them money on margin, there's a risk they will lose that money. So they, the clearinghouse, forced Semgroup to unwind their entire position to Barclays. Semgroup eventually went bankrupt. Literally a week later, oil crashed spectacularly. Over a month or so, it fell nearly 80%. Semgroup missed out on $5 billion profit. Netflix came really close before they wised up and shelved Qwikster. I trot this story out anytime there's a discussion of business stupidity. This isn't a big corporation, just a small business, but the principle applies. When I was growing up, there was a hardware store in my town owned by a crusty old guy. The aisles were 2 feet wide and the light bulbs were only 40 watts. It saves electricity, the owner would say if someone complained. The shelves were lined with small, worn cardboard boxes of nails, nuts, screws, bolts, washers, practically every connector or fastener available, every size, shape, threading, and composition. Did you need a zinc alloy washer 2 inches in diameter with a 2mm hole, or a reverse threaded hex-headed brass machine bolt, or a lock nuts for the tailpipe bracket of a 1977 Oldsmobile? This old guy had it. When I was about 20 he passed away and his wife hired a business manager. He installed new lighting, widened the aisles, and eliminated the inventory that didn't sell well, which was about 90% of it. The store was stocked with the most popular fasteners and related hardware. It looked nicer, it smelled nicer, it had most of what everyone needed, and it was out of business in less than a year. Most of what the old guy sold sat on shelves for years. I remember one box from the 1940s that was still half full of bolts. 99% of it you'd never need. But if you needed any fastener, you went to his place first, because you knew he had it. Once it was the same as any other hardware store, folks quit driving across town to pay slightly more for guaranteed selection. Using Android is like peeing in your pants for warmth in winter. Nokia, the 21st of September, 2010. We love rice here in the Philippines. There's a popular and relatively cheap Japanese restaurant that served unlimited rice for every meal, and it was very known for it. Some brilliant guy decides to take it out, word gets around, and people stop going there. A few months later they decide to put the promo back, but the customers just stopped coming. That would be like Olive Garden deciding that breadsticks are no longer unlimited. I would never go back. Schwinn ignoring the super small niche market of mountain bikes, leaving at little specialty shops like Trek. Way to blow a 30-year lead, brainiacs. Borders ceasing business operations with Amazon. Borders starting their digital operations through Amazon. BN made their own paltry digital effort, and at the same time Borders sided with its worst competitor. Also, in order to reduce costs, it gave some publishers control over what was going to be displayed in the stores, and of course these publishers only wanted to show their own titles. Circuit City making the decision to no longer sell appliances. No matter how bad the economy is, people will still buy refrigerators, washers, vacuums, etc. But they will wait on TVs and video games. Selling off CarMax was pretty stupid, too. Fred Goodwin from Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS, probably has to be up there somewhere. Turn RBS into the largest company in the world by buying a lot of companies. These companies did not do well. The bank collapsed spectacularly and the government had to buy 73% of it to stop his folding completely. Fred the Shred lost his job, his knighthood, and was forced into retirement. When he joined the company, shares were worth 442p. When he left they were worth 65p. They also posted the biggest loss in UK history, £24 billion. Dang, didn't realize you could lose a knighthood. That's one heck of a frick up. Dig that irreversible system upgrade. I worked on the TV show Fear Factor. Pretty sure making 2 hot blonde girls drink donkey semen killed the show. It was cancelled after the controversy of that episode. I never heard of that. Goddamn, that is definitely an insane decision. Western Union rejected the telephone in 1876. Radio Shack's decision to move away from hobbyists and General Electronics to becoming a cell phone store. This year, POWDR, a group that ran Park City Mountain Resort, the #3 family ski resort in the country, got absorbed by Vail. its competition, and removed from ownership of its resort. Why? Because after 20 years of having the greatest lease in history, about $150,000 a year for a resort that grosses millions and millions, the end of the lease time rolled around, and they forgot to renew it. Literally, that's it. Someone didn't take down a note, and they turned their paperwork in 3 days late, got sued, and lost everything. Do your paperwork. Peanut Corporation of America found salmonella in their products. The owner covered it up and told them to just ship it. Infected and killed scores of people. The company went bankrupt almost immediately after it was traced back to them, and the owners were charged and prosecuted. The Milwaukee Road is one of my favorites. They abandoned half of their main line because they thought it was losing money despite having heavy traffic. Several years after they had torn up the line, they realized there had been an accounting error, and that was actually the only part of the system that was making money. They sold off some of their rolling stock to generate some short-term cash and then leased it back. When the lease price increased, they could not afford to repair their own equipment, so they sold off more to the leasers. Rinse, repeat. Instead of completing their electrification and buying new electric locomotives, which GE was willing to give them a deal on, they decided to remove the electrification and sell it for scrap. When they did this, scrap prices fell and it ended up being more expensive to dieselize than it would have been to finish their electrification. Needless to say, things did not go well for them. Breyers ice cream was the brand with simple ingredients listed on the back, and built a name bragging about how real they were. You might remember the commercials of little kids reading milk, sugar, vanilla, back in the 90s. Bought out by Unilever, the ingredients now are so artificial they can't legally be known as ice cream anymore, and is called frozen dairy dessert. Consumers confused why their favorite flavor doesn't melt and has the consistency of marshmallow have complained on the brand's social media accounts. Here's a sad one. Malden Mills, original producer of the polar fleece material, CEO Aaron Feuerstein decided not to patent it, which made it an open source textile able to be produced cheaply and widely. This wasn't the decision that killed the business, though. In 1995, Malden Mills burned down, at a time when manufacturers were relocating their operations overseas to cut costs. Feuerstein rebuilt the factory at the same location, and he continued to pay the salaries and benefits of all his employees during the rebuilding. Said Feuerstein, I have a responsibility to the worker, both blue collar and white collar. I have an equal responsibility to the community. It would have been unconscionable to put 3,000 people on the streets and deliver a death blow to the cities of Lawrence and Methuen. Maybe on paper our company is worthless to Wall Street, but I can tell you it's worth more. Sadly, the company never recovered. Feuerstein was eventually ousted, Malden Mills declared bankruptcy, and its assets were sold off or spun off to new companies. Radio Shack is doing it slowly. They used to be the place to go to get resistors, switches, and boards. Now, the employees don't know what a potentiometer is, and they insist on selling me smartphones. Also worth stating that they know almost nothing about cables, or types of connectors. At my local Radio Shack, they're of zero help. Kmart took out a whole bunch of debt to buy back their shares, looking to raise their share price. When news of this came out, Walmart, which had basically no debt at the time, decided that it would be a good time to start a price war. Kmart had to pay off interest, whereas Walmart had little to no interest payments to make. So by lowering the profit margin to a point where Kmart had to cut back on their internal investment, Walmart surged ahead while Kmart lagged behind. The biggest cut Kmart made, I believe, was CapEx, capital expenditures. Things like making new stores and upkeeping current ones. And that's a major reason why Walmart is so popular and booming, whereas Kmart has always just seemed a little off. The way Walmart handles their supply chain was pretty revolutionary, too. I'd say that is a major factor in Walmart being in a position to do what you outlined. Motorola thinking smartphones wouldn't catch on. Related, RIM thinking they could ignore the consumer space of the smartphone market. Enron for paying their executives idea bonuses before the ideas turned a profit. They paid one guy millions for inventing an online movie downloading service about 10 years before that was feasible. Ironically, the documentary is available on Netflix. Smartest guys in the room for those who are interested. I love that doc. And that example was the least of their problems, considering the purposed rolling blackouts, mark-to-market predictions, and pump and dump schemes they pulled. Just one bad decision after another. Lupai though, he's the real smartest guy in the room. It did not kill the company, but Fox inadvertently handed George Lucas a multi-billion-dollar merchandising empire to save a measly $20,000 on his Star Wars salary. Watched a documentary on his and it seems a fair trade tbh. Basically it says Fox was on the verge of bankruptcy and basically Star Wars saved them, so they might have been strapped for cash and it seemed like a wise move at the time. Arthur Andersen, one of the, then, Big Five accounting firms, got into several bad lawsuits leading up to the Enron scandal that took down the entire firm. They were essentially signing off on sketchy Enron transactions on the audit side so they could keep charging about $100 million in consulting fees. The feds prosecuted the crap out of them and the whole multi-billion-dollar firm collapsed. And a funny side story to that, a few years earlier Andersen Consulting, an Arthur Andersen spin-off, was widely derided for changing their name to Accenture, losing their name recognition. Turns out it was a pretty good change. Kodak telling the creator of digital photography to go frick himself. Atari spending something to the tune of $100 million 1980s dollars to buy the rights to make an ET video game, followed by only giving a guy about 2 months to design, program and bug test the game. It didn't just come close to tanking Atari, but console gaming in general. HP and virtually everything they've done since the 90s. Compaq merger, overpaying for EDS, WebOS, hiring sales execs as CEOs, Carly Fiorina, drastic cost cutting and huge layoffs of engineers nonetheless, not marketers. I don't see them taking the IBM route with the leadership in place. Shame for such an iconic company as HP to be so terrible at everything. Sci-Fi Channel changing their name to Sci-Fi and replacing their good shows, that is, Battlestar, with crappy reality TV. They're lucky they still exist at all. It didn't turn out badly, but FedEx's founder had a potential Darwin Award on his hands. When the company didn't have enough money to fuel planes, he took the company's remaining funds, went to Vegas, and bet it all on blackjack tables. Now, it just so happens he won enough to keep the planes flying, thus saving the company. That was practically a coin toss, though. Back in the mid-90s pre-Napster I worked for BMG marketing those 10 CD for a buck crap. A memo came down from up high declaring the internet a fad. Not sure I can point to a specific decision, but once upon a time AOL was effectively the internet for people, even prompting companies to post AOL keyword, blah, in ads. And then cable came along and AOL never adapted. Was an interesting 5-10 year flash in the pan. You have been spotted by the rare flying floofer. If you comment good boy below, he don't steal your hot dogs anymore. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.